Good evening. We're going to do another classic album review tonight. It's one probably a lot of you have heard of, but some of you might not have. Tommy Bolin, Private Eyes. There's the album, the old vinyl album. I've had this for since the 70s. So, I probably bought it in 78, 79, and this is my copy. And, of course, anytime you talk about Tommy Bolin, you can't help but sort of talk about his tragic death at such a young age and his career so promising cut short in a Miami hotel room in December of 1976, the tragedy of drugs. And we'll talk a little bit about him and his life, but mostly we're going to focus on his music tonight. And in particular, I'm going to say some things about this album, which I listened to quite a bit. I'm not as familiar with this first album, Teaser, but I know this album pretty well. I listened to it a lot. Tommy Bolin was born in Sioux City, Iowa, back in the early 50s, but he ended up moving to Colorado and kind of getting into the rock and roll scene in Colorado. Played with some cool people, including a guy named Jeff Cook. And I just want to say, I was kind of researching this a little bit, and it turns out this guy named Jeff Cook, I don't know how much about him, but he ended up being a producer, and he actually wrote some of the songs with Tommy Bolin that are on this album that are my favorites. And he started playing with a guy named Jeff Cook. And he ended up being in some interesting groups. He was in the James Gang, and he was also in Deep Purple. He played on Come Taste the Band. I remember when that album was in the stores and everything. I don't think they played it that much on the radio. One thing about that period with Tommy Bolin, I know he was kind of frustrated by it, because it sounds good to say you play in the James Gang, you play in Deep Purple. Those are both classic bands. But he was also the replacement guitarist for bands that were kind of trying to keep it going after their star guitarist had left. So he replaced Joe Walsh in the James Gang, and then he went on to replace Ritchie Blackmore in Deep Purple. It's not that those shoes were too big to fill for him. He's a great guitarist and artist and entertainer. But, you're just coming into a situation where the band kind of half fell apart, and plus, you go into a stadium and you play, Walk Away or Highway Star or something, and no matter how good you are, everyone's going to be wanting to hear Deep Purple. So neither of those bands really lasted much after Walsh left or Ritchie Blackmore left. Of course, Deep Purple ended up reforming, but the kind of classic lineup had broken up, and the bands were kind of trying to keep it going. And in both those cases, Tommy Bolin was kind of the fill-in. Nobody would really like that. Although I hear "Come Taste the Band" is a pretty good album. I'm not that familiar with it, but I'm told it has a different feel to it than the classic Deep Purple you might know with Ritchie Blackmore. But I'm told that's a pretty good album. I have to get a copy of it. Maybe we can talk about it some night. He also played with Billy Cobham, from the Mahavishnu Orchestra. He played with some interesting people, Then he did 2 solo albums right around that time. His first one was called Teaser. I'm not as familiar with that. I think this, I did hear some Teaser. I thought it was pretty good. But this is the album I know pretty well. This is his second and last solo album. It's called Private Eyes. And I really like this album. I bought it in like 78. I didn't buy it when it came out, but I did buy it in the 70s. So this is a fairly vintage copy of the album. Now, Tommy Bolin died of a drug overdose, and for some reason when I look at this album, it has a sophisticated but kind of decadent look to it. He's in bed with 2 beautiful women there, somewhere in Asia, looks like. Maybe on the tour in Japan, who knows. He toured Japan, I think, with Deep Purple. But I like this album, and it's got some good songs on it. It's got a song called Bustin' Out for Rosie, Shake the Devil. Of course, Post Toasty is a song he did that ended up being kind of his finale. Every band kind of had a closer that kind of would jam. But my favorite songs in this album are the ones he wrote with this guy named Jeff Cook. Like I said, I don't know that much about Jeff Cook, but I was researching it, and it turns out all the songs I remember liking that I think had a kind of sophisticated edge were Bolin-Cook collaborations. Sweet Burgundy, Gypsy Soul, Hello Again. Those are kind of nice. They're sensual. There's some acoustic guitar in them. They've got some interesting chords and kind of good poetic lyrics. And that was my comment about Tommy Bolin. I think he had good songs. You know, so many guitarists back then. The 70s was full of great guitarists, but they didn't have good songs. You know, I don't want to start naming names because maybe I don't even know what I'm talking about, but like Frank Marino, and there's some great guitar players, and they had good jams. You'd listen to them, and the sound would sound great. The guitars, the rhythm would be great. The only thing was they didn't really have good songs. You know, good songs come from good lyrics and a good idea. A song has a good idea to it. You know, it's like art, any kind of art. It conveys an idea. And in music, that's, of course, the music is an idea, but also in a lot of cases the lyrical content. And I thought the songwriting on this was really pretty interesting. I think it's something. He was just young. He was 25 when he died, so surely he would have developed more. But there's some pretty interesting songs on here. There's a saxophone. There's some acoustic guitar, electric guitar stuff. It's got kind of a smoky feel on some, and it's got the good old, jams. But it's got kind of that 70s funk rock too, like "Shake the Devil," and "Bustin' Out for Rosie." It's kind of got that funk rock, of the mid 70s. That was kind of cool, very rock, but it had that kind of funky guitar and. A lot of good soloing on it, and so it's a very good album. I really recommend it if you haven't had a chance to listen to it. Private Eyes. I guess just kind of a wrap up. Didn't want to go on too long. Some of my videos go on too long. I play too much guitar or something, have a little fun, but I don't want this to go on too long. But just a little wrap up. I actually remember hearing about Tommy Bolin. I was listening to his death, and I didn't know who he was, but I was with a friend. We were driving around in the car in Wheaton, Illinois. And we were listening to WXRT, and that was FM. And that was in the days of FM rock. And this was pretty countercultural, even for the days when FM in general was still kind of countercultural. But it was one of those FM dials that was way over on the far end of the radio, and they'd play anything. They'd play whole album sides and read poetry and have head shop advertisements. It was still the hippies, but very kind of an intellectual station. I think they had days where they would play classical music, and I don't know if WXRT is still there, but anyway, we were listening to WXRT, which was a pretty cool radio station, and I don't think they would have done this. They might have mentioned it in the news or something, but this station broke in and announced the death of Tommy Bolin, and so I remember when it happened, or I was probably the next day, but when they announced it, and they played all this Tommy Bolin, and we were kind of driving around the car and listening to it, and I just remembered that, and later on, I ran into this album and bought it because I just remembered being in the car and liking his music. Like I said, it's very sophisticated music in a way. I think it would have developed more. I think, if you wanted, you could always say that he didn't get a chance to really fully develop, obviously, like any artist does. He only did 2 solo albums. He was only 25 when he died. But he has some good songs. And the songwriting, he was a great guitar player. And, of course, there are a lot of great guitar players in the 70s. But he has some good songs and a concept and it's kind of a distinct sound. It's a very... it's kind of an adult sound. I don't want to say it's a little decadent, but you could definitely tell it. But it's not party all night, Friday night. It's kind of got a adult edge to it, and I really like it. It's a very sophisticated concept of music. But he died in a Miami hotel room, and he was warming up for Jeff Beck. So he also warmed up for Peter Frampton. So he was on his way up. He was warming up for Jeff Beck. That's probably a pretty good gig. And he had this solo album out and died of a drug overdose. And just what are you going to do, you know? And it was very 70s, you know. A lot of, I feel like there was a lot more drugs around in the 70s, you know. And there's not that there's not drugs around today, but and he had a bunch of other stuff in his system, but I think the main drug that killed him was 70s. The other thing I kind of want to say about his death is, in some ways, the thing that when I read about it, that's kind of infuriating is they probably maybe could have saved his life, but of course there was heroin involved and nobody wanted to call, I don't know if they had 911 then, but nobody wanted to call medics because, you know, it's the law enforcement. They, you know, they didn't want everyone to see a heroin overdose. So they kept trying to revive him in a bathtub with ice and all these kind of home remedy overdose treatments. And you know, it's easy to be critical of those people, but on the other hand, we have these bullshit drug laws, and they could have gone to prison. You know, I hear they had to make a choice: do you want to go to prison for years or call the medics? You know, and it's a pretty difficult choice. It's easy to be critical. Anyway, it's always sounded to me like it was one of those situations of several that I can think of where, because of the laws involved in law enforcement, medicine wasn't called, so someone didn't get the medical help they needed because of the law enforcement mechanisms of our war on drugs. Not blaming that for Tommy Bolin's death. Nobody held a gun to his head and told him to take heroin, but it is sad that you know, they were so afraid to call anybody. It sounds like that's kind of reading between the lines my take on the story. And yeah, he ended up dying, and I guess he kind of half revived a little bit during the night, and they thought maybe he was snoring a little bit. They almost thought he was dead. Then he kind of came back and was snoring some, and you know, and they thought maybe he was okay. And but he should have had medical help. But anyway, he died, and it was a very sad death. But I definitely his first album was called Teaser, but this is Private Eyes, and I haven't heard Teaser as much. I did like what I remember hearing, but this is a really good album. Like I said, it's the album of an artist, you know, on the rise and developing as an artist. But it's a very cool album. It's a very adult album. I think he could have been. He played with Jeff Beck and Billy Cobham, and this album has some jazz. And kind of good lyrics too, you know, in some of the songs. So I think this could have been quite a, you know, one of those artists in the 70s that was adult, and I don't mean that in a, you know, a risque way, but, you know, kind of serious music, you know, not just, you know, but it didn't happen. What are you going to say? But Tommy Bolin was a fine artist. Everybody said he was a good guy, great guitar player. So definitely recommend Private Eyes.